of these conclusions? Well, we need to look at the prophecies and see how the symbolism of the prophecies fit the actual historical events. What did Genseric do? The prophecy says, a great mountain burning with fire was cast into the sea. This reflects his burning of 1,300 ships in one night, doesn't it? A third part of the ships were destroyed, is what the prophecy says. That reflects the fact that a third part, because remember we said that Rome, the empire, was divided up into three pieces? The third part, that western part, lost its whole fleet. So a third part of the ships were destroyed, literally. Genseric captured the major islands of the western section of empire. He brought down that whole western section. So a third part of the sea became blood. We define sea by the Bible. Seas and waters by the Bible means peoples, multitudes, nations, and tongues. By the time Attila and Genseric got through with their campaigns going through the country of Italy, there was not much left. They destroyed most of the people, burned the villages, forests were gone, farmland was destroyed. There really wasn't anything left. It was unlike anything that had ever been done before. Attila, on the other hand, blazed swiftly. He didn't ride in boats. He came on horseback. He rode over the frozen mountains in the north of Italy like a meteor. He just kind of, pew, here he came, you know. The major rivers of northern Italy all have their headwaters in these same mountains. So the prophecy fits when we talk about the symbolism of rivers and waters. That fits because that's where Attila came from. The judgment was bitter because the consequences were bitter. By the time Attila and the Vandals got through with their pillaging and war in this area, there wasn't much left. It was a bitter consequence that was left on Rome. So the symbolism fits Attila here more than it does Genseric. Now, the fourth angel sounded, and a third part of the sun was smitten, and a third part of the moon, and the third part of the stars, so as the third part of them was darkened, and the day shone not for a third part of it, and the night likewise. What did we say about the third parts? The Roman Empire was divided into three parts. This third part, Italy, and that sector, the western sector of Rome, was struck heavy blows by these first four trumpets. The symbolism here deals with the government being the sun, because the Roman emperor was considered the sun of the empire, the S-U-N of the empire. Those that supported him were the moon and the stars. The council, the senate, they all revolved around what the emperor did. And like we said earlier, in 476, the last Western emperor was dethroned by the herald under Odoacer. The man's name, and he was just a young man, was Romulus Augustulus. He was the last Roman empire that actually was seated in Rome. The herald put a ruler in place, but he was not a Roman ruler. He was one of their own. Interestingly enough, this last emperor was called Romulus. Do any of you know from your history studies the names of the first two men that established Rome in 700 and something BC? Romulus and Remus. Same name. They were brothers. So we have a Romulus that started Rome, and we have a Romulus that was the end of Rome. Bookends. I just found that just terribly interesting that they had the same names. Probably has nothing to do with anything, but I just thought it was terribly interesting. This is our summary. We're about done, so take a few more minutes and we'll be through here. The prophecy in Daniel spoke of a metal man. Daniel chapter 2. Head of gold, chest of silver, belly of brass, 2 legs of iron, and the feet that were divided into 10 toes that were clay and iron, mixed, right? The 2 legs represent 2 halves of Rome. The feet and clay represent divisions of the Roman Empire. This is a standard understanding of the prophecy. So what we see, we're down now into the toes of this prophecy. That's where we are in history. The first 4 trumpets deal with the breakup of the Roman Empire into the toes. Okay? The western sector stayed under an emperor that still called himself a Roman emperor. I mean, the eastern sector. The western sector stayed under the control of some barbarian ruler for a period of time, but during this time, papal Rome, the church, was rising up, and they were striking to be rid of these barbarians. They were left without control of the eastern half of the armies. They were left to themselves. They formed allegiances with any barbarian tribe that they could. And you'll remember that 408 is a date that we mark in prophecy, because 408 was when the Pope of Rome formed an allegiance with the Franks, and they became Catholic. And then the Franks began to fight against the other tribes. Okay? 508. I'm sorry. Yeah, 508, not 408. So from 476 until 508, we had this time period that Rome was literally controlled by the barbarians. They set up their own king there in Rome. In 508, the Pope said, no, we're going to do something different, and he formed an allegiance with Clovis, who was a Frank, and then began the battering of the 10 horns. So we had 10 divisions, but 3 of them were lost. That's what the prophecy there in Daniel says. The prophecy of Daniel's 10 horns was that 3 would be replaced by a little horn that came up among the 10. Remember this? That's Daniel 7, 24, and 25. By AD 538, the papal wars had wiped out the 3 rival tribes, the rival tribes being the Vandals, the herald, and the Ostrogoths. Now remember earlier we said that they were labeled heretics and labeled Arians in the history books. The victor writes the history, right? Whoever wins writes the history. The Roman Catholic Church won. They wrote the history. But that doesn't mean that they're not historians in other parts of the world that were also writing history. So if you just read the Roman Catholic version of the history, these people were called Arian. You read somebody else's version of the history, like we looked at earlier, and saw what Ulfilas did, and read a different history from a different perspective, we see that they weren't necessarily Arians. Were they heretics? Well, they didn't go along with the Roman Catholic doctrines, so Rome considered them heretics. To summarize here, from our earlier studies of 2 Thessalonians 2, we learned that Paul said that there would be a falling away and that this man of sin was going to be established. Remember that? But there was something that was hindering the establishment of this man of sin and power. What was hindering was pagan Rome. Once pagan Rome was taken out of the way, then papal Rome could come in. And that's what we've studied here this morning, is these first 4 trumpets hammered away at pagan Rome until pagan Rome ceased to exist in the Western Empire. Papal Rome filled the void for power. Somebody had to be in charge. Papal Rome rose in place of that. When they rose, they knocked out those 3 tribes that God had used to chastise the church and try to bring it into line. So we'll study more about this when we get to the little horn over there in chapter 13. To put this back in context of the Old Testament, up to the time of the Babylonian exile, monotheism had waged a losing battle against idolatry, and ignorance of the Bible was commonplace. Now we find the same thing in the Christian church. Paganism won. Christianity, true Christianity, waged a losing battle, except in little places like with the Waldensians and the Albigenses. They maintained true Christian worship. But papalism took over and brought in all this paganism, brought in all this idolatry, and this idolatrous methods of worship was all brought into the church. The trumpets were sent by God in an attempt to stop this. Didn't work. Because compromise was made